Welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm excited to be spending this hour with you. I'm not going to take any time. I think we should definitely leave you the floor, and I'll be happy to react with what you've got to contribute. So,
in no particular order, I'm going to begin with Claire because Claire is the first box I can see at the top. So, Claire, would you like to start?
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. It's a real pleasure. So my name is Claire Marie. I'm a French person, so really happy to have the opportunity to meet another French people in the room. And I'm currently based in India, where I work with young people living in slums. So we do not have access to education, actually. That's why I'm really happy to be part of this discussion, because on the one side, I'm happy enough to work with these young people who have nothing to start in their life. And on the other side, I work with companies who want to provide them with education. So because they know that these young people didn't have access to school, or maybe they had a difficult beginning in their life, I would say, suffering from gender-based violence, from discrimination, from war sometimes. So we are trying to bridge this gap between the young people and youth education coming from companies. So because I think, in my opinion, that the most important thing when thinking about youth education is that first, you have access to education in itself. But second, you have access to employment. And we realize more and more today that we have an important and never increasing gap between what the companies are looking for and what schools or people actually who cannot access to schools miss. They lack the necessary information, maybe. And actually, that's what you demonstrated in your study when you explained everything about macroeconomics. I really liked when I took a look at this, and I believe that companies definitely have something to say with regard to youth education, but we tend to think actually that NGOs, government, and schools are the ones who have to take the floor, excluding more or less the companies. So that's a point I really wanted to raise today, and hopefully that's coming together with such brilliant mind in this room, we will manage to have some interesting ideas to give access to education for everyone, regardless of their gender, age, background, nationality, anything, and giving them access to a decent work, to a decent future, and just like allow them to be themselves. So if I had one question to ask you, is there anything we could do as young people in order to convince the companies that they have to take action, and which action they could take in order to allow economics to be like sustainable, meaning that everybody will have the opportunity to have a decent future, a decent employment, and a decent education.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for your work. That's exciting. Where are you based in India?
So actually, I was based in Kolkata. Now I'm in New Delhi and moving to a more remote area near Varanasi soon.
So something that's very interesting and the kids you're working with, what's their age?
Usually we work with people from 17 to 24 years old, because that's the one who are the most excluded and the one who can find employment, avoiding paid job offers and not being like employed as slaves. That's the point we realize.
So it's a very interesting age group, and it's an age group that has been a little bit neglected in the research and the inquiry into policies. Yeah, there has been a lot of effort to ensure that younger kids do go to school, and we are near. We were, I guess, COVID threw a big wrench into this, but pre-COVID we were near universal primary school enrollment and even junior high school enrollment. But this age group, towards the end of secondary school and transitioning into vocational education or college, is where very little has been done, both policy-wise and research-wise. So it's great that that's kind of the place you've identified as one key area. And you're absolutely right to point out that this is connected. There is a close connection between job opportunity for this age group and educational opportunity. And that to the extent they've gone to school, they leave the school system often completely disarmed to do anything useful in the labor market. We actually have done a study in Kolkata and Delhi, so that's what kids know in mathematics. And we've worked with two samples, one sample of kids working in markets and one sample of kids enrolled in schools. of this age range, like 16, 17, 18. And what is striking is that the kids working in markets are extraordinarily good at math, at market math. But if you ask them the math in the way that it is posed in school, they can't answer because they immediately freeze and say, oh, this is some school thing that's not for me. Now, if you take the kids who are in school, they can do the school math, but they are absolutely terrible at doing the market math. They take a lot of time, they get it wrong. So basically the school is unable to acknowledge the skills that exist in the world, and it's also unable to provide skills that can actually be useful to the world. And that's a problem. That's not just a problem of the companies. You say, well, the companies have to step in and do something. Could be true, but also that the schools have to change such that what is being provided in the school is of practical relevance, and also doesn't exclude the people who have a lot of practical knowledge. So that's a fundamental problem. Now, what's the solution to this problem? I don't know yet. I think it's hard. It's the beginning. There is a lot that needs to be done in the school itself. There is a lot of mindset changes that have been done in the school themselves, because right now, the schools see themselves basically as prep school for preparing students for engineering schools or so on. So they're really teaching to a very small minority of children who can cope with that, leaving everyone else behind, thinking that, oh, in any case, that's not really for them. So the school ends up teaching a small sliver of students that, look like you, brilliant mind and so on, and leaving everyone else behind. And it's really hard to change. It's driven by the exams. India has the board exams and then the IIT exams or the, medical college exam and so on. Everything drives that from the top. So one mindset change is needed there. And by the way, it infects everything up to almost preschool. That in preschool, they're already starting to teach two hard competencies to get them ready for those IIT exams down the line. And now in the companies, the issue that's highlighted in the economics literature about companies is that it's never in the interest of a company to set up a training center, because if they train people, they might train them and then they'll go work for someone else potentially. So the incentives are not there for companies. And then finally, there are the people themselves, the students and the parents, who have bought in the ideology that schools is to prepare you for, a government career, and are not particularly interested in even acquiring the basic skills. And therefore, as a constituency, are not pushing for what, I'm arguing they should be pushed, or you arguing we should see an education that makes you ready to affront life and get a job. They are more pushing for this, narrow-minded teaching to the test education. And that makes for a system which is very, very hard to change, when the one people who have the incentive to change something, which are the companies, are worried about the competition, and everyone else is not really interested. So that's a big work. And, one has to kind of try things little by little and see what can be done, starting from the school, starting from the company, starting from the NGO, starting from a tutorial and rethinking the what's provided in extra education and so on. And it's not going to happen in one big day where you're going to solve the entire issue, but you can and should chip at it. So congrats for your work.
Thank you very much indeed, Esther. Thank you, Claire, for the statement and question and raising such an important issue. And I'm going to go to Dia next, because Dia, you sent a text comment quickly. So do you want to just very quickly, just a couple of sentences, comment on what was just said, and then go into your topic, please?
Yep, no, I definitely agree. So hi, everyone. I'm Dia. I'm joining from Australia, but I did more so my schooling from India. And Esther, I completely agree. The education is so directed towards these exams, and it does not prepare us for life. And in today's time, where the whole world is just so many rapid advancements, you cannot predict what's going to happen in the next 5 years, and we're educating people for such a rapidly, dynamically changing world. And I think the focus should not be more so on the content, but again, as you said, on the skills to learn, to unlearn, how to be able to figure out solutions. So yeah, that was, very good discussion. Back to you, Adam.
Well, no, dear. Now, do you want to jump in and take the floor for a minute?
Sure. Okay. All right. So, hello, everyone. Absolute pleasure to be a part of this discussion. And I really believe that youth education is a very underappreciated topic in both the development economics and foreign aid policy. And there's two key reasons. First, I firmly believe that youth education is one of the most productive investments that can be made by developed economies in order to help them achieve their UN Development Goal targets. This is because investments in youth education can deliver productive outcomes, not just for youth education, but also other UN targets: hunger, inequality, poverty, economic growth, and gender inequality. And second, I firmly believe that we need a tailored design thinking approach with targeted programs to address numerous systemic issues like gender inequality in women's access to education, something that I'm very passionate about this topic in conservative patriarchal societies. So one example is like India, and also the historical and sociocultural barriers which are present for Indigenous Australians' access to education, talking from a more Australian perspective. So I grew up in rural India, and me and my mother and sisters faced lots of sociocultural, socioeconomic, political barriers to access good education and opportunities coming from a more so low middle income background. And so I just wanted to, in today's discussion, briefly touch on those key issues and also share some personal accounts and experiences, and then open the floor for discussion so we can come up with some prospective solutions, I suppose. And Esther, I absolutely love how you described the poor as sophisticated economists in your book, Poor Economics. And I love how you explain why the poor make choices that they make and how it sort of perpetuates the poverty trap, and then how it sort of limits their access to better education, and then how it sort of plays on with everything else around them. So yeah, my only question was that, Esther, you've worked and traveled extensively in developing countries, and you've done so many social experiments. Absolutely fascinating reading about them, and you've worked with NGOs. Could you share a bit about any successful targeted aid programs that you think did a really good job? And if you could sort of highlight what were the key elements of those targeted programs which led to that success?
Thank you so much. So in bouncing off what you said about, and also the discussion we were having with Claire before about the fact that schools are not really teaching very much, and to the extent they are teaching a small minority to take hard exams. One successful approach to fix it has been championed by an organization in India called Pratham. And in fact, my first ever randomized evaluation was a remedial education program done by Pratham, which is the ancestor of what they call now teaching at the right level. And the idea of teaching at the right level is to kind of break that mindset of elite bias schools, put kids by what they know and what they need to learn. So if a kid happens to be 10, but nobody has taught them to read, then they need to go back to that. On the other hand, if a kid is 6 and is already very conversant in algebra, they can do algebra, and therefore they are not going to capture all the attention in the early math class in their age group. So what the way the program actually works is that a few hours in a day, or it could be in bursts during camps kind of situation, the teachers, the regular teachers, or the part-time staff, depending on the cases, groups kids by level of achievement, and then provide targeted activities for that level. And we've been evaluating this in many variants. We've also worked to scale it up within governments. And Pratham now reaches millions of children in India in collaboration with various states. In Delhi Municipal Corporation, actually the entire approach of the school has basically adopted the idea of Pratham, done away with trying to teach everything at the exam, and as a result has actually improved, paradoxically, the performance at these very exams by saying explicitly, we will not teach the curriculum anymore. We will teach what kids need to know. paradoxically, they actually improve the performance on the tests that are supposedly sanctioning this curriculum. So that's an example of something, through a series of experimentation has been highly successful, and now is going to Africa. There is now a TAL Africa. They are in several countries throughout the continent, working with government to scale up the approach. So that's an example.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Dia. Thank you, Esther. Okay, let's go to Ben next, if that's okay.
So just some brief background. I'm Ben. I'm from Singapore and I'm 17 years old. So I think I'm like one of the youngest people in like this room, this meeting. So currently I'm in junior college 1. So I think in other places it would be considered like high school. So I think I have quite a limited kind of interaction with the education system. But so my kind of queries would be based on kind of how, like my experience through the education system and what it's been like for me. So I think one thing as a child growing up, one thing that you hear a lot is that I think Finland has a very strong education system. And I think touching on what Ms. Duflo kind of brought up just now, which is kind of this need for more like soft skills acquisition in education. I think so in Singapore, the government also has been recently stressing like this point and how important it is, because now the workforce is really volatile. And so we have a lot of different measures like, I think, for example, My Skills Future, which kind of helps people to, that kind of promotes lifelong learning to help people continue acquiring skills that are relevant as the job industry keeps changing. So reading up on Finland, I think I was quite surprised and amazed at how their system works. I think one of the things that struck me, I was watching in, I think either a news broadcast or some documentary, I think mentioned that the education system in Finland is a lot more flexible. So I think one of the things that I remember hearing was that teachers are kind of allowed to decide their own curriculum and kind of decide what they want to teach kids in their own classrooms. And then another thing is like the presence of vocational education and vocational training, which is kind of available quite early on in children's lives. So I think it was post-secondary, which is about teenage years, where children are already allowed to specialize and kind of acquire skills that can point them towards specific jobs. And so I was just kind of wondering, especially with all the discussion earlier, how important is kind of this flexibility in education right now? And does it really help in kind of succeeding, rather than kind of this rigid and like very fixed content-based, like, oh, you have to study this curriculum kind of system that is, I think, is what's happening in a lot of other areas. And then another thing is, I think what Ms. Duflo, I was reading a bit about her like background, what she wrote. And I think one thing she said kind of like struck me, which is that like everybody has some sort of like innate talent. And it's just whether they're kind of cultivated in the right way to kind of express this talent that they have. And so does a more flexible approach to education kind of help bring out like the best in everybody? And then also another thing would be, how kind of sustainable is this model of flexible education? And like, is it possible to implement it in other areas, besides like Finland? Is it possible to implement it in other countries, other systems? Because I'm not too sure on how feasible it would be. Yeah.
Thank you, Ben. You're very thoughtful, 17-year-old. I'm glad you highlighted Finland, because indeed Finland is at the top of all of the OECD performance in TIMSS, in PISA, etc., with the possible exception of Singapore. So maybe it's worth mentioning Singapore as well. And in fact, although Finland and Singapore are very different educational system in many ways, there is one thing that at least in France is always told about Singapore, because now we have adopted Singapore math in the French schools, at least in the good ones, is the idea that the whole class doesn't move until everybody has understood what was on a particular page. So the idea there is that, of course, there is no flexibility because the textbook is quite prescriptive, but there is a keen attention to not leaving anyone behind, and that it's more important to finish the book and that everybody can finish the page. There is no reason for anybody in the classroom not to master the concept, and the teacher should try until everybody has understood. And that's completely different from the idea in India, say, for example, where the first priority, in fact, it's a legal requirement, is to finish the textbook, going through the textbook. Never mind if one person, two people, or nobody has actually understood what was said. And so that is in common between Singapore and Finland, where the focus on Finland, as far as I can tell, there are several relevant things in the Finland model. The first one is that teachers are well paid relative to people in societies. Mind you, that's also true in India, where they are extraordinarily well paid relative to people in India. But compared to, and it's true in a lot of poor countries where being a teacher is a very desirable job. But for example, in France, teachers are at the very bottom of the pay scale. And therefore, not very many people want to be teachers, and people also don't want to stay, and that's a problem. So in Finland, that's like a respected job and something that people want to have. The second thing is that there is a sort of national agreement of what at least primary school should deliver, which is kids who should read absolutely fluently, understand what they read, and do basic arithmetics. And that's it. And so once you have that, then you can, of course, give full flexibility to teachers for how they want to reach that point. And you don't need to give them, like in week 1, you have to do the circle, and in week 2, you have to do the perimeters, and in week 3, you have to do, as it is in India, where the curriculum are like specified to the excruciating details. Once you agree on what is the objective of the school system. And it seems to be a very reasonable objective for primary school, that everyone should reach that point. And then once you set that as a point, then another advantage is there is no rush, because it's not that you want to cover so much that you need to start so early. So kids do not start learning to read in Finland until age 7. So by the time they start learning to read at age 7, they are very mature, and it's much less difficult for them to do it. And so very few people have struggled, and the people who do struggle, for example, because they have dyslexia or other form of learning difference, a lot of attention is paid to them so that they can manage. And in fact, one of the best reading software that exists in the world was developed by researchers in Finland initially to help kids with dyslexia, and now it helped many other kids learn to read fluently through phonics methods. So that's, I think, a few things that are characteristic of Finland. As usual, there are other things that are different of Finland, so you cannot say this is the magic formula, it would work everywhere else. Or maybe it would work in Finland even without this criteria, but at least this gives you something for reflection. Whether it can be reproduced elsewhere, it's nothing stops it. I mean, it could definitely. It's not a question of money, except for paying the teachers. But in India, they're already overpaid, so that's not an issue. It's not a question of resources. It's not a question of having more books or so on. It's really a question of agreeing on what we are aiming to do, a minimum set, but being really sure that we are going to get there and do it. And so it's more about political will than anything else, I think.
Thank you. Sorry, Claire, you wanted to make a very quick comment.
It will be 30 seconds. So I'm a former teacher. I was working as a teacher before joining the NGO in university and in primary school, which is completely different. And I believe that the method you just mentioned could be really implemented in other countries, but you need the willingness from the teachers. Like I know in France, it would be possible, for example, through the Montessori school, which are like really particular. But as you mentioned, French teachers are not that well paid. And I don't think they will have the willingness like to implement this kind of thing. And you have this problem in many other countries. So that's really what we are looking forward to change the education system. And you mentioned it, and the previous speaker mentioned it. We need the willingness from the different stakeholders, and hopefully it will come one day. Thank you very much, Adam, for giving me the floor.
Thank you. Okay, it's so hard to know where to go next, but let's go to Charlie, please.
So hi everyone, I'm Charlie, and I'm currently at my home in Hanoi, Vietnam. So I really enjoy the discussion with everyone right now, especially like what the problem that Ben brought up, because it's kind of like a trend in Asia in general, that we don't really prepare children for life. We just teach them to do exams, and the education system in Asia is very different from the Western education system. It's like in Asia, I don't know for some reason why, we value achievements above the skills of the students. Like even our parents from when we are very young age, they would say that you have to do good at math. You have to actually, it's not just one particular subject. Our parents want us to have A++ in every single subject there are. And it's crazy, but that's how Asian education system works, like all the way from the past until now. So our generation, we have spotted out this kind of problems, and we want to fix it. We want to figure out something. We want to achieve what Finland have. But like, it's really difficult because of how our economy works. In Finland, like everyone has known, they pay their teachers really well. That doesn't work here in Asia. I don't know about other countries, but specifically in Vietnam or in China, teachers, in order to make more money, they have to do extra classes. They don't just teach in school. And because of that, because of all of those extra classes, students want to go there instead of school. So the school, for some reason, kind of like lost their popularity, lost their fame. So they don't teach as well. So basically, it's just kind of like, it's a problem, ongoing vicious cycle, kind of like that. So my question is like, how can Asian countries do better in their education system? Because yes, if I understand that we don't have the money to pay teachers, but teachers are the advisors, they are the guidance for youth. And if we're not paying them enough, how do we expect students to do better?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll have to check how well paid teachers are in Vietnam compared to the rest of the population, because it's always a matter of where do you stand in the distribution. But I want to mention that, so again, as I said, in a lot of poorer countries, middle-income countries, teachers are relatively well paid. So, and in fact, in some experiments where have doubled the salaries of the teachers. So in Indonesia, there was an experiment where they decided to double the salaries of the teacher to see whether that would fix some of the problem you mentioned. And that produced exactly nothing. So there was no impact of the teachers. It was randomly selected. So some teachers made twice as much, and then they didn't teach anymore or any better. So that might still, over the long run, you might still have a different selection and so on. But it's not very clear that it's in a good way, because, for example, in India, being a teacher is such a desirable job that, people sacrifice everything to finally get that job. Then they get the job and they feel they can now go on vacation for the rest of their life because they finally, won the lottery. And the whole point of getting the teacher job is to be paid and not have to do very much. So I think, unfortunately, it's not going to be fixed by changing salaries. It's going to be fixed by, and mind you, again, there are countries where teachers are completely, dramatically underpaid. France is one of them. So their salaries have to be fixed, but it's not, in many cases, it's neither necessary nor sufficient. And in France, I don't think it would even be sufficient. As I said in response to Claire's statement at the beginning, unfortunately, I don't think there is any magic bullet, because as you pointed out, that's part of the problem reinforces itself, because regardless of their salary level, as long as there is the possibility of teaching, of moonlighting as a tuition teacher, then at some level, the less you teach in the school, the more you'll get your students as your tuition teacher, and you make private monies anyways. Regardless of your salary level, why not get this extra money anyways? And in fact, there was a paper from Vietnam showing that teachers who teach private tuition teach less well in the school, because it could almost on purpose in order to keep so that people have an incentive to attend the tuition. The school then becomes not really a place where you go to learn, but a place where you go to take the exams. So it's still important as a legitimation of the system, as well, but not as a place where people learn. And that's a fundamental betrayal of what the school is. And what it would take is to take this entire system away and try to find a system that people do not need the tuition classes anymore. It would even be better for people to be fully in private schools than to have public school followed by tuitions, because then you have this space of bad teaching that survives for no reason. But it requires, every context will be slightly different in terms of how it can be arranged and how it can be organized. And, vis-a-vis Dia's earlier question about how do you generate the political system to make this happen, I think it kind of rests with your generation and what when you become, what as students, and then if you go in the teaching profession, and once you have children, what you demand for your children. And it's more likely to happen, little by little and showing example and then progressively flipping a system than by someone trying to do it, all at once. So for example, the example of Delhi is good. Delhi Municipal Corporation is good in this respect, which is it's the first system in India that just said, okay, we are going to completely change how we approach the whole problem. And because it was successful, then other places are now looking at what they are doing and say, maybe we can do the same thing too. And things get in this way spread. The idea spread.
And just a quick follow-up. Ben raised in the chat the interesting point that this race to the top, this desire for everybody to get A triple plus in everything, is a cultural mindset. Is there anything that should be done? Does it worry you that there is this trend towards higher and higher grades?
I don't know that it's a cultural mindset, as in something that I don't know is in Confucius and cannot be changed. I think it's a cultural mindset, as in it's everybody in a society that is having the same type of views at a given point in time. But that's because they also respond to the same social pressures. So I don't think it's culture in the sense of being, deeply ingrained that, my children will only have A pluses or I will be a failure. It is responding to what employer wants and what the school system rewards and what your friends do. And so it is more of, in the economic jargon, we would say it's more of a coordination equilibrium than something which is deeply felt, probably. So I think you can move out of it. You take the Jews in the US, where the Asian of today, several decades ago, where they were discriminated in access to the best universities, they were discriminated in employment, they were looked at funny, and the response was to work like really, really, really hard. And then as they become much more comfortable in society, they kind of are living now a more standard American way in terms of their relationship to education, which is not entirely healthy, but healthier, let's say. And it's Asian students in the US whose parents are, again, pushing for perfect grades and so on, with some good impacts and some bad impact, in particular, everything that has to do with mental health that tends to explode when the kids reach young adulthood. So I don't think it's about your genes or the history of your original countries. I think it has a lot to do with the incentives that are provided in the rest of society and the obstacles you feel you'll have to jump through to have a decent life.
Thank you very much. Okay, Abdul, please.
Hi, I'm Abdul Rahman from Malaysia. I'm 33 years old. I think I'm the oldest here. Now, so I'm a lecturer working in medical faculty. So in the medical faculty, I'm working as an educationist. So more, but it's more close to the medical education. But for me, it is a nice platform for me to talk about the education in general with all in these participants in this dialogue today. The thing that I like to raise the thing that I like to ask and to discuss with all of the participants today is about the experience of the education and the effects of the pandemic on the education. As we can see, like if I can give the example from my country, Malaysia, we see that after like we call it as a post-pandemic, we see that the education, there is an issue with the education, such as the interest of the youth to pursue in tertiary education or post-secondary education. I'm not sure what is the problem with this, but I think one of the problem is because during pandemic, the exposure of students, they have more sessions with the online sessions using the something not face-to-face. So there is somehow the factor that contributes to that. And other thing is post-pandemic, there is a problem with the families to what we call it to improve their economy, because during pandemic the economy of many families have affected so much, and so to improve or the solution that they take to improve their economy is the youth. For example, they do not want to pursue their tertiary education. They, after the secondary education, they straightly go into working life. Okay, so this is like, in fact, it is contributed by the unstable economy of the country. I think my country itself, and also the youth also, they think that the education that they have is not worth, because after they complete the education, I mean the tertiary education, the job that they get is not worth for them to have a decent life. I mean to earn for a living. The money is not enough for them. So this brings to me like I was thinking about what is the value of education. Our generation, I mean the youth generation, is thinking right now the value of the education, the quality of education that we the government, for example in my country, and I believe also in other parts of in other countries in the Southeast Asia and the Asia Pacific, the value of education that the society think of. I'd like to ask Mrs. Esther Duflo. So what do you think about, for example, like in my condition, I'm working in the education as a lecturer in the tertiary education. We stress on the outcome-based learning. So what do you think about the outcome-based learning? And can you talk a bit about how is it done in the Europe? And is it really as a tool that is very good for us to solve this quality of education that we have?
Thank you.
Thanks. So if you don't mind, I don't know much about how outcome-based learning is done in Europe, since I don't live in Europe, so I'm not going to comment much on that, but I'll take advantage of your intervention to say something about the pandemic and its effect on education, because it was very important to highlight that. First of all, it was really like it was heartbreaking in many countries, in particular the poor countries in Latin America, in Asia, in Africa. The schools were the first to shut down and the last to reopen. The moment they reopened, they reclosed, like with Omicron. And so basically in lots of places, the schools have been closed for the best of 2 years. In the Philippines, they just reopened, literally now, after the pandemic. And I don't think we have any understanding of how bad this is. When kids had access to online education, those were the lucky ones. Many people were not online in any ways. They've lost touch with what was happening. I don't know how many are coming back, in particular in the teenage years. Maybe Claire has experienced that once you've dropped out school as a 13-year-old, are you going to go back as a 15-year-old when the school reopens? It's not clear. You've moved on, started something else, and so on, and question the value of education. And for the kids who are coming back, then it exacerbates what we were discussing before, which is very heterogeneous level confronted with a very rigid system. So we already had this problem before, and now we have it even more because people's experience during the pandemic was quite different between the families who were able to support their kids and those who weren't. So the next few years are going to be really recovering from that, and it's going to require work at all levels, from ECE to tertiary education. In the developed countries, we talk about it a lot, about how this generation is, has been sacrificed and so on. But compared to the plight of the younger, of people living in poorer countries, it's nothing really.
Thank you. Thank you for those important thoughts, and thank you for raising the issue, Abdul. Malcolm, should we go to you next, please?
Hello, I'm Malcolm. Like Ben, I'm also a junior college student in Singapore. And I think my experiences are more tied towards science communication and science outreach in Singapore specifically. So I think, as previously touched on, with a lot of the societal issues with regards to education, I think in Asian countries, but I think in particularly Singapore, there's this prevalent grade-centric mindset that also really affects the way that children learn. And especially when it comes to science, this affects the passion for learning, where instead of actually trying to grasp a concept, they tend to focus on how best to get an answering technique to get the grade, which in the long run, especially for those who wish to pursue like careers especially in scientific backgrounds, this would have quite a large impact. So I think with my own personal experiences, I'm trying to do my best to be part of a few science outreach programs where we try and use hands-on experiments to help students with this, to try and expose them to more of this scientific phenomenon, to get them to better understand get this passion back. And I think also on a somewhat related note to science outreach or outreach in general, I think I found a paper that you did in 2010 where you actually discussed the beneficial impacts of having volunteers themselves organize some reading camps, which actually help to substantially improve their reading skills. So I guess my two questions would be, one, how exactly can we improve the hands-on experiences in learning in general, not just science, for students worldwide? And how important do you think it is for students who have more background in these fields to help students who aren't as fortunate? Thank you.
So that's a wonderful question. I think you raise kind of heads on the question of pedagogy and whether pedagogy can be improved if you want to, like, can you do better than what is being done? And I think we started to get a lot of evidence that, yes, there are things that you can do to just make the pedagogy work better. There was a study done in Uganda about teaching critical thinking skills to first training the teachers to do it and then doing it with the kids, that showed amazing impact, both on critical thinking, but also on sort of the regular things taught at school. Maybe because once you possess those critical thinking skills, you can apply them to all sorts of things like science and things like that. And maybe in the short run, mastering the techniques to pass an exam is efficient, but in the longer run, knowing how what this type of questions relate to is actually an even better techniques. So this is a paper by Abhijit Banerjee and others in Uganda, showing dramatic impact of doing that. So I think this type of study should highlight the importance of introducing this type of curriculum in schools, both in richer and in poor countries. And again, we'll kind of meet a little bit the same constraint and the same but there is a curriculum to finish and people need to have trained, solve the 25 integral problems. Otherwise, they haven't really done, they've done nothing worth it, and so on. But it's possible, and there are now examples of things that work remarkably well. With the advent of using digital methods, these type of things can also circulate even outside of school. So Pratham has a hybrid learning program, which they are doing in rural Rajasthan at the moment, in places where kids are in school, but the schools are not very good. And they have these tablets that they circulate to groups of kids, which offer them activities. So little experiments they can do together in the village, and then stuff they can do to understand what was the nature of the experiment. So they have now developed a whole library of these activities. We are in the process of evaluating the impact on math and English of going through these other activities. And on top of that, there could also be the direct impact of those activities. So it is an area where, at some level, I'm a bit more hopeful that we can make progress there, because everybody sort of agrees where we want to get to, which is it would be better to understand the science than not understanding. So it's more a matter of showing people they are misled if they think they're taking a shortcut by doing a lot of rote learning. This, in fact, detract them from the goal.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And again, I just mentioned time because we must make sure everybody gets to speak. Sergio, you're with us at the moment. You've been coming and going. I guess the connection is a little thing. But if you could just very briefly say your points.
Yes, everyone can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, first of all, my name is Sergio Herminio Gomez Fernandez, and I'm from East Timor. And I'm a medical student at the National University of Timor-Leste, and this is my third year. Well, I will begin by saying, as the president of South Africa, Nelson Mandela, said that education is the most powerful weapon which we can change the world. And I do agree with this statement. As a youth, everyone has a much more important role in a nation building, and everyone has an equal opportunity to develop their country. However, currently, according to the UNICEF, 10.6% of the worldwide of young people are non-literate. And in my country itself, now 13.7% of young people are literate, and 70% of the grade of the student do not meet the basic requirement for the school grades. Also, this all happened because of the educational system and also the curriculum. Here we have two official language, which is Portuguese and Tetum, but in school we learn 4 language, which is comes with Indonesian and English. And it is hard for people to understand because some people have to take the informal education about courses so that they can understand better in school. And also in my country, many people are still literate because as my country is a developing country and there is no school in rural area. And some people have to walk for about 2 or 3 kilometers or even more to go to school. And this is sometimes exhausting for them to go to school. And on the other hand, there are still a lot of people that underestimate the importance of education, because many of the agricultural son and daughter, they prefer to work in agricultural life and earn money instead of going to school. And some parents think that supposed to do the housework instead of go to school, and that is also a problem. And on the other hand, about the informal education also, all the scholarship provided in my country are their requirement need the language proficiency test, which is IELTS test and TOEFL test. But we know that to get that test, people need to pay. And also from that condition, make the people, all the rich people that can get access, because the poor people can get access because they don't have money to take the language proficiency test. And there are still a lot of problems, but I think regarding of the time. And also I want to ask a question. Yeah, as I am a medical student and I have to go to school from the morning until the afternoon. And because of all this problem, I think I must contribute, but I don't have a lot of time because of the field I'm chosen. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I'll say, it's most important now is that you're successful in your medical studies. It's perfectly fine. We all have times where we are, developing our own things, and times where we can volunteer and do other things. And you should never feel guilty because at this very moment you are not contributing to education. By training yourself to be a doctor, you will do tremendous good in your country, in the world. So I wouldn't be stressed out at all. And at some point you'll find time to engage with these issues.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sergio. Thank you, Esther. Okay, Edwina.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here. So I think the points that I want to bring up actually fits in with a lot of the parts of the discussion. So first, I'll just give a brief introduction of myself. Hi, my name is Edwina. I'm an undergraduate student, and I'm currently residing in Canberra. So I'm fortunate enough to actually go through my education in 4 countries. So it's Indonesia, Singapore, South Korea, and now in Australia. And I think that it actually allows me to see how much education opens opportunities in my life. And then it allows me to reflect and see how I can bring these opportunities to the children in Indonesia as well. So when the pandemic hit, I saw the digital education as being an opportunity, a hopeful opportunity for us to actually equalize education, especially in a country that is like big and with a lot of rural areas like Indonesia. But then, in fact, it actually widens the gap because people stop education, like what we've discussed earlier. Like they quit school because of the pandemic, because they don't have access to internet, for example, so they cannot actually attend schools online. So actually, my question is that in a country like Indonesia that is huge geographically with all the rural spaces, how can we actually equalize educational opportunities given we have limited resources, limited number of teachers, and like can digitalizing education really be a solution to this problem? Thank you.
So Indonesia actually was remarkably successful at equalizing opportunities to education in the 70s with the Sekolah Dasar program that took schools all over the place. And for a country of that level of income at the time, it really was really ahead of the time. Now it became a little bit richer, and education also progressed. So it shows that it's not the scale of the countries or the resources available that matters so much in making education available. It's whether or not you decide to get it done. So in my opinion, education cannot be done fully digitally because people need to get together. On the other hand, it's good to think of the digital means as something that can complement. For example, we were discussing about the ability of materials like, a great math curriculum for kids who are a little bit older can be provided digitally. A great experiments, ideas for experiment, etc., can be provided digitally. So I think you want to think of the digital tools as complementing the basic structure of the school. and allowing their tailorization of experience that we already said is important. So with a digital education program in math, for example, kids can be given questions that are appropriate to their current level of understanding until they move to the next level. So I think it's good to think of the two as going in parallel. A physical space where you meet your friends, you learn the soft skills, you read to someone and so on. Combined with a digital universe that provides a lot of material that would otherwise not be available.
Thank you very much indeed. And thank you, Edwina. Jackie, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jackie. So many thanks for the great discussion so far. I think my what I want to contribute is actually continues from the previous discussion about, when we have education that equips people for employment, then the next step would be, whether education really promotes social mobility or not. So, for example, many politicians will advocate that education is the magical solution to social mobility. And the reality is, for example, I grew up in China, and the college entrance exam, the annual exam, is still seen as a lifetime opportunities by many families. But of course, we realize that the higher the social origin, the more resource parents will give towards their kids in order to achieve a relatively higher educational level. So in a system where there's a high population or high competition, the employment or social status is more or less determined by the relative educational attainment, then people would naturally do whatever it's possible to climb up the pyramid. Otherwise, fundamentally, only the employers can change the situation by creating more higher paying jobs. So the question that I would like to raise to Esther is, do you think education is the solution to improve social mobility? If not, what is it? Thanks.
I think that's a great question. So there is this French sociologist called Pierre Bourdieu who wrote a lot of excellent books about education. One of them is called The Reproduction, which was demonstrating how the educational system serves as a way to legitimate and kind of cast in stone the existing inequality, because it describes, or it describes them as the product of meritocracy, is how well you did in the exam. But of course, how well you did in the exam is itself a reflection of how much resources was put into exam preparation and the schools you went to, and whether your parents could help you, and so on. And that makes the argument of Bourdieu is that makes the inequality even more impossible to break, because now people who are at the top, in addition, they feel very, very self-righteous about themselves. They say, no, I've earned all of this through my own hard work, and I came first at the exam, and so now I justify my place in society. Whereas in the past, it's like, oh, I'm rich just because my parents happened to be rich and I inherited their money. So by converting the economic capital into human capital, the school system actually kind of is a magic trick that transforms lead into gold, and something, or basically washes the money from blood money to good money. And that is a reality, and a huge problem. And on the other hand, I do think that education is the only way out. It's just that we need the educational system that are more equal from the get-go. And that goes back to all the conversation we were having before, is one reason why educational systems are so elite biased is because the elite is using them to reproduce their own elite status, and it has to be as hard as possible, because then that ensures that it's exclusionary. And the school system loses its value as providing information, and to gain only a value as certifying information. And then that's where also you get into this Vietnam discussion about teachers, moonlighting as tuition thing, and the school system just being a place where you take your exams. So I think it can be changed, but it has to be changed by reforming the curriculum and what is being taught in schools and what is being expected from the schools. And also maybe, by companies being more creative about how they recruit people. At some point in India, software company just had open doors for anybody who wanted to come in. Even with zero coding experience, you could come to an Infosys center, take an exam that's more of an IQ exam that required no particular knowledge, and then they would train you. And I think some more of that would be needed to provide a bit of competition to the schools as well. In saying, if you're really just reproducing the existing inequalities, you're going to lose your pot. That's a great question. I think it really encompasses a lot of the conversation we've had today.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm aware that there's also a very interesting discussion going on in the chat, and we must make sure to capture that and bring some of that also to the September the 13th discussions. But I just need to make sure we give time to Mimi next, and then Evan after that. Mimi.
Thank you so much for having me. I am Mimi, and it's a pleasure for me to have a chance to join this wonderful discussion. And I'm joining from Thailand. I am a third-year medical student, and I've worked with the community in the southern and northern of Thailand, where students, as in my community, like medicine courses, my discussion will follow the previous discussion that has been made. I've found out that with COVID-19 and even before that, the environment and Thai education does not empower the students' creativity and does not allow students to care for the society's problems, whether it is poverty, gender inequalities, or social hierarchy. So even in a medical school where you have to work with the community for the rest of your life, in Thailand, from my own experiences, they only focuses on academic knowledges and not how we can contribute to the society as much as we can. So we have already touched on the economics part of the youth education. So I just want to touch on the topics of community engagement education today. I believe that all students should have the opportunity to try caring for the community, learning about the problems in their community and society, which will definitely help them in life, and to be a change agent and a global citizen, and also to help them build the soft skills rather than sitting in a class and taking the stuff that they might not even wanted to know. So I wanted to ask whether, do you think focusing on community engagement education and community education is a good approach to help students learn more about life? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's yeah, I agree with you. I can't have much more to say. Especially in medical school, it seems to be crazy that they don't put you in front of patients. That seems to be a pretty important part of medical school education. And that relates to the point we made occasionally about vocational education. And one difference between Finland and France, for example, is that in Finland, or it's the same in Switzerland as well, vocational education is part of education from an early stage and is not considered to be a waste of time. And that's again related to why do we have the schools? If we have the schools just to reproduce the existing inequalities and it's a rat race to who has the best exams, then it's naturally going to lead you to this dried up system where we only teach you this rote skills. If we think of the schools as a place where we actually try to generate information and share information, then we'll be looking at the information that's useful for people, including how to be in the world. And how to see the issue in the world.
Thank you very much indeed. And Evan, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for speaking with me today. I'm Evangeline from Singapore, and I'm a postgraduate student with the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. So I've been actually working on education policy in aspect of whether the effects of education policies on income inequalities. So dovetailing to what Jackie actually shared earlier on education and social mobility, I would actually like to pose a question on whether do you think that the current education system in Southeast Asia actually violates meritocracy and the equity of opportunities among the students? Yeah, thanks.
So I don't think it violates meritocracy because I think the exams are pretty transparent and well run and all that, and there's not much, in a sense compared to the American system where there is less emphasis on the exam, but you need to have started violin at age 3 to have any chance to get into Harvard, and volunteered in the right place, and so on. That's, I think, violate meritocracy much more, because these systems are impossible to negotiate for someone who is not in the know. If the system rewards skills that it doesn't teach, and stuff that it doesn't do, then it's basically that's a violation of meritocracy. The Asian system has the advantage of being quite clear about what you need to do to succeed, and there are disadvantages to that because of the teaching to the test that it leads to, but it has the merit of being fair, at least in the to a first degree. Now, there is a second degree unfairness, which is the one we were describing, which is once the expectations are very clear, then the race is on, and the families can organize themselves to dope their children in these races. But if I had to choose a system, I think I would still prefer that than the American system, which is so deeply unfair at the end of the day. Because people learn at 17 that they should have started the violin at 3. It's too early. It's too late. There's no violate meritocracy. Is that meritocracy itself is not the panacea. Is what Jackie was talking about. That is to have lived under the illusion that meritocracy means that inequality will be solved by the educational system where they won't be. So it doesn't violate meritocracy. It's the embodiment of meritocracy, but we should be much more creative in our idea of merit. Then that would work well this way.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm aware that Esther has just 1 minute left with us, and I, from my point of view, I just want to say what a privilege it's been to listen to all of these amazing thoughts. It's really been wonderful. Esther, perhaps you would like to just say some words to close, I don't know, summarizing how you feel about the discussion or something.
Yes, no, just to thank you for your very thoughtful remarks, and listening to you feels very good and hopeful. There are many problems that your generation is going to have to solve. Education is one of them. Climate change is another one. And to see young people who are as deliberate and thoughtful as you makes me hopeful in turn.
Well, thank you very much indeed, everybody. This discussion will be available online for everybody to see, with very slight editing of some of my comments. And I just want to thank you all for taking part. Esther, thank you very much indeed for your time. Thank you to all of you.
Bye-bye.